Well, welcome to the Italian American Stories podcast. I'm super excited to have you.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, I'm so glad that you reached out to me. And then after looking over all of your stuff, I can't wait to talk all about you. So, one of the first things that I always ask my guests is since we're the Italian American Stories podcast, is to tell us a story about your Italian American family, memory, experience, anything that you want.
I grew up in Long Island and typical Italian American family. Food was a big thing in our family. I learned how to cook from a young age. I really enjoyed it. My grandmother used to make meatballs with pine nuts and raisins.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, so that always stuck with me. So whenever I cook, I try to make them the way she did, and they never come out the same. But um, Christmas is the best time. Christmas Eve. Um, we're just really loud. I have a very large family. We're very close. And now we have this new thing where we all dress up in Christmas pajamas.
Oh, cute. I love it.
I think my aunt Louise has the most fun with it. Because then she'll be like dancing the whole time, and we taunt each other, and so that's like the most fun. We're just like a big family that has a lot of fun.
That's awesome. How cool. I love it.
Cook and eat.
Cook, right? Exactly. You know what I love about hearing people's recipes is, we all have a meatball recipe, but they are all so different. Just like a lasagna or a sauce or gravy or whatever you call it. They're all so different.
Yeah.
Like was it pine nuts and raisins?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I've never heard of that. How cool is that?
It's so good. And actually, my grandmother, she also used to make sauce with the cow's tongue.
Oh, haven't heard of that one.
Yeah, well, we were poor, so those used to be the cheapest cuts, but it was actually it's really good. So
I'm sure. I mean, it's kind of like all of those dishes now are so popular. Those kind of things. So. So where is your family from in Italy?
Napoli and Calabria.
Okay, awesome.
Yeah.
And did your grandparents come over or?
Yes.
Okay.
My mother's parents, my grandparents actually had an arranged marriage, so that was interesting.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, they're from Naples, and my father's side is a little bit more Americanized. And my grandfather on my father's side is from Calabria.
Okay, awesome. Great. Well, perfect. Well, thank you for telling us a story. That's always great. All right. So like I said, I'm so excited to dive in all about you. And not just like for the listeners, but me too, just looking over all of your stuff. I think you even made a post today that I saw about, it was just so beautiful about like changing the narrative of women and stuff. So yeah. So being Southern Italian, I see that you have like Southern roots kind of all over your stuff. Is that kind of what ingrains you? What inspired you? Is it kind of involved in everything that you do?
It is. Well, now it is. But growing up, my mom used to do, she would save the tooth and save the piece of the hair and, have like little I forget what they're called. They're like amulets of protection, and these were kind of like pieces of our fabric pouches, and they were just the normal. They were in the china closet. We weren't allowed to touch anything in there ever. I've always been a witchy kid. I just kind of grew up with extrasensory gifts, and my mom was one of those women. It's like, how does she even know this? It's like, it's like I couldn't lie. And it was just something about Italian women. In my family, actually, we are very matriarchal. Like the women ran the show.
Yeah.
My grandmother and my great aunts, it was like, they
were in charge.
They were in charge. But I had about 3 years ago, I had a spontaneous Kundalini activation, and I don't practice Kundalini yoga. I've always been like the baby dreamer of the family prior, and it was kind of like a fun little like extrasensory gift. I've I guess I've always been somewhat empathic and very intuitive.
Hmm.
But 3 years ago, there was a really big shift in my life. And that kind of put me on a journey that I didn't at the time have language for. I
Okay.
began hearing a woman speak Italian to me in my ear. So, like, naturally I go to the doctor. I make sure I'm not, I was like, oh my gosh, and all was fine. I was going through a transition in my life. So that was amplified. My nervous system was raw. So I was very, very open to everything. But I began researching. I began speaking to my friends about what I was going through. And one of my friends, her name's Summer Lacey, she's like, I have this book. I'm like, what? Because this was not in my stream of consciousness. I was like, I'm a dancer, a choreographer. I, grew up in New York,
Yeah.
and I wasn't fluent in Italian, so I didn't understand what was going on. So I began reading this book by Karen Crisis because I think my friend knows her. And all of a sudden, as I began to read, my body started to vibrate,
Oh,
and I
wow.
was like, oof. And then that's when everything, the floodgates opened up, and
Oh,
I
cool.
began going through what I now know is a Kundalini activation and a series of shamanic initiations. And
Okay.
so as I began to research, in addition to that first initial book, I was reading about the Janari witches, but there was an article about the Janari shamans, and how the maturity time is usually at the age of 40, and I was 38 at the time. And so
Okay.
I was like going through these series of initiations, like seeing things that completely changed my belief system, seeing spirit, seeing the realms in between, knowing information, having just direct communication. And, to make a long story short, it led me to Italy to kind of discover my roots. And it initially started as um, research, and then it was like an ancestral healing, and I had a lot of experiences with the ancestral healing.
Yeah.
And then I'm like, I'm a dancer, because I was going down the healer's route, but there was
Sure.
something missing, because I'm like, maybe I'm supposed to be a healer, maybe I'm supposed to do something else. But there was something like, no, my soul was saying, I have to go back to dance. I have to go back to dance. And I'm like, I need to do both of it. There's something that's intertwined here. And as I
Yeah.
was reading about the Gennari, and I went to Benevento, and I was learning that they were artisans. Like, they were artists, they were
Oh,
healers, they were botanists, they did it all. These women did it
okay.
all. And they were women who were connected to source. They were the bridge between the celestial realms and the earth. And what I learned is a lot of their formulas for healing were taken when they
Oh,
started to be like, they started to have hospitals, and men wanted to
oh,
become doctors. So all of these like healing mechanisms were stolen from them. But,
yeah.
and it's funny because like then they had to create synthetic medicine, right? And we're
Yeah.
wondering why they weren't having the same results as these lineage healers. It was because there was the elements of prayer and
Mm,
channeling and mediumship that has kind of been suppressed for so long. Like myself, like, as a kid, I would see things, and it's just your imagination. You're fine. You're fine. And I'm
yeah.
like, and repress, or don't say that, people are going to think you're weird. Or, there was that internal like fear of being seen,
Sure.
fear of being sent to the gallows or burned at the stake.
Locked
um
away.
yeah, it's like, but those traumas are really stored in our cellular memory. So it led me to Italy, and I was studying with lineage healers. I was still dancing, but now what I'm doing is I'm doing both. So
Okay.
I do shamanic healings, I do readings in the Akashic records, I do cartomancy, I read the Sibylla Indovina. And I also am creating artistic work around La Donna della Notte, which were some of the secret societies of women,
Oh,
the ladies of
wow.
the night. Yes. And so like they would have communities and talk about abundance and manifestation and celestial mapping and all of these things. And I'm like, my head is buzzing right now because I, I've never, I don't know a lot, everything. And I don't know about a lot of things, but
Sure.
I know we're not alone. And it was funny because learning about witchcraft brought me back to my faith, and it
Oh,
was the
wow.
wildest thing. And now like I'm thinking about creating work about the Madonnas and the rose, and it's just so beautiful. And there's that element of benedicaria, it's that blending of the faith and the spirituality and the use of the herbs. And I'm like, okay, now I know where I'm going.
Now
Now
you
I know
know.
where I'm going
Yeah.
with this, because I look around, and even before all of this happened, I kind of was like, I would always get a little bit annoyed because, and it wasn't done in, um, with malice, but, trying to copy the way Italian Americans speak, overly embellishing this New York accent and
Yeah.
all this stuff. And it's like, we're so much more than
Oh,
that.
yeah.
And then there's the Hollywood, and every film has to be about the mafia. And
Hmm.
we're more than that. We're more than just mafia and pasta and spaghetti and meatballs. And what about the women? Why
Yeah.
is nobody talking about the women who were murdered? Why is
Mm.
nobody talking about these gifts, these spiritual gifts, these rituals, this integration of, this divine feminine and divine
Yeah.
masculine coming together, and birthing ideas. And so I'm like, I'm gonna say that through my art, and if it's weird and witchy, so be it. Yeah.
Oh, I love it. No, I think that's great. And for me, I've always kind of, and I didn't always know this, but probably 5 or 6 years ago, I think it dawned on me. I look at Southern Italy as having that faith, Catholicism blended with, like you said, the spiritual world, I guess you could say, with healing and herbs, what would be considered witchy. I don't know how else to say that, but I've always thought of that as being blended in Southern Italy.
Hmm.
And so I think it's fascinating. And I know that this happens in other cultures too, but it just seems like how you were saying you were kind of drawn to Italy and like you knew it was kind of always in you. I completely understand. I mean, I feel that way kind of with what I'm doing with, like, I feel like I just have to tell the stories that are out there, kind of like what you were saying. There's so many stories out there that people are not telling. And it just kind of drives me. Like I always felt it took me a long time to figure out how to kind of channel it. And because I've always done ancestry and genealogy and writing. And then one day I was like, I have all of these articles of Italians that I don't know who they are, but I just thought it was really cool. And then I was like, I should just tell their stories, but I don't want to tell the stories of Joe DiMaggio. And, I want the stories of people who are not known and will be forgotten if we don't tell them.
Well, you have
So,
actually a special gift as a writer. And what's one of the things that I do when you're channeling is the automatic writing. That the key is
mm,
not to get stuck by judging and observing, oh, is this a fact? Is this true? Because there's so much information that we're receiving that has been omitted from the books. And so
sure.
when you share information through your automatic writing and like things that you're receiving, a lot of times they are actually accurate. It's just that there's not always research to back it up because
Sure.
they have been taken. It's been taken
Yeah.
out. And so this wisdom is being returned to us collectively. And that's one of the downloads that I have gotten, is that the wisdom is coming back. the
That's amazing.
veil the veil is thin, and people are waking up because they are like, I noticed that, I mean, just look at the industry. The people are really into like health and wellness, and really
Hmm.
connecting to that side of them because they want better. They want a
Yeah.
more holistic life.
Hmm.
And that is the way of our ancestors. That was normal. And then finding the way to fuse that with technology, because technology can work for our benefit. I mean, look
They
at us
can.
right now, like we're having
Yeah.
this conversation. So I think that, as a writer, you have more information than you think. It's just trusting it.
Yeah. No, that's amazing. So can we go back a little bit and tell me and the listeners, what is it? Kundalini?
Kundalini.
Kundalini. Okay. Could you explain that to us?
Whew, I'm still trying to figure that out because I don't practice Kundalini yoga. I'm lucky
Oh, okay.
I'm lucky I can get to yoga.
Yeah.
Kundalini energy. How do I explain that? Okay. I can explain the experience of
Okay.
having a spot. Okay. So a Kundalini energy is your life force energy that supposedly like it goes up and down your body like a serpent, right? It's like it goes up, then it goes down like a spiral.
Oh,
And
cool.
so when your chakras are clear, so it's I think it's like it goes based on like the Indian system of chakras, right? If they're clear, it will flow perfectly.
Okay.
But it sometimes if you have a spontaneous Kundalini activation, where like you're not ready to have it, it'll hit the blockages. So, because I had my spontaneous Kundalini activation after a traumatic parting of an 11-year relationship. So there's no avoiding that biological separation where your nervous system is just like, and so,
Okay.
but it triggered this awakening process. So let me tell you something. I had not only things to clear and patterns and traumas from this life, I was clearing my ancestral trauma on a deep cellular level. So it feels like, for me, it felt like heat would move through my body and then it would kind of get stuck. And then finally, I would, because thank God I am a dancer.
Mm-hmm.
I have techniques of somatic practices. So I would like take a lacrosse ball and like roll out my legs and like dig into the knot. And
Yeah.
when I was going through that Kundalini activation, I would go right into the belly of the pain. And I said, what is it? Let's release it. And I would have the download, see what it was that was trapped in my physical cellular system, and I would release it, and I would do that Ho'oponopono prayer. Like I accept, I
Yeah.
would accept what it is. Thank you for the lesson. I love you. Thank you. And I'm ready to let you go. And then afterward I would feel cooling sensation.
Oh,
And so
neat.
and the thing is with Kundalini activation, you have to be careful because you should always go to the doctor, make sure like what's your nervous system like, and I was telling my doctor like this is what's going on, and luckily my doctor's Greek and he's like, you're fine. Just be happy, healing, this is normal. So like yes, there was a normal human element of it, but at the same time there was something much deeper that was happening there. And I was like, what is going on? Because there's no rule book. There is no
Yeah.
rule book. There's only online, there's people's interpretations of what this is. And that resonated for me, that yes, I'm going through this life transition. And also, for myself and parting with a partner, but I'm
Mm-hmm.
also going through the spiritual awakening, and my gifts are coming back online stronger, and there's something to it. And intrinsically I knew there's healing that needs to happen here. And then you keep, it's funny because we're magnets. And then it's funny because people start coming into your life with information, and I
Mm.
believe that that's your guide saying, here are some people that can give you information. Of course, you use your discernment. Is this true, or does this work for me?
Sure.
I met some amazing people that I'm like really opened up my perspective. But the key is not to rely on those people as your truth, and to develop what is true for you. And everybody's process is different. So Kundalini, it's like it is a deep clearing of like our bodies hold not just the pain memories from what we experience, but it holds like generations of trauma, like our nervous response. If I don't like this, or they were saying they would I was watching something online and they did an experiment with rats, and then they would shock the rats if the rats tried to leave the cage, and then the
Okay.
rats had babies, and they put the babies in a totally separate cage and left the door open, but the babies wouldn't leave.
Mm.
So that trauma is in our bodies. And I know, like, and again, like, I'm not a professional somatic practitioner, um, but as articles when I read and I watch videos, just to educate myself, there is very much like a very large link to the traumas of our family, our ancestors before us, that
Yeah.
that is our responsibility to clear.
Yeah.
So yeah.
I
And
think
so
it's fascinating.
Kundalini does that.
It does that.
It forces you, because it's almost like you can't move, you can't do anything. Like your body will, like, you'll have muscle like spasms until you do the work.
Oh, wow. You know, it's funny because it's kind of become a theme on my podcast, the last couple of interviews I've done, talking about blood memory. And it's kind of, I think, what you're talking about. And it's how you were saying that veil is kind of becoming thinner and we're trying to get back to some of that old ways. And I think one of the things that people are doing right now is researching this idea of blood memory. So have you heard of that?
Well, Martha Graham has a book, an autobiography called Blood Memory.
Okay, so maybe that's it. And it's
It
kind
could
of the
be.
same thing. It's
Yeah.
like they're saying that some of the, like they've done for Holocaust survivors and their generations that came after them, that this could even be in their DNA, that trauma that's happened, and
Yeah.
understanding, you know, why we have these fears when we shouldn't have these fears, because it didn't happen in my life, but it's coming through my
Mhm.
ancestors into
Yeah.
this. And so I think that's so fascinating because I believe in being grounded in my ancestors. You know, I mean, I have them on my wall. You know, I just think that being grounded in that, but it's not always going to be a positive situation that you're grounded in.
No.
You know, it could be with all of those memories and the strength and the courage and the love that they had, but we all do. We come with that baggage that you
Yeah.
have to deal with. So
Absolutely. And they, the thing is, one of the things from that has come into my understanding is that, and through my channelings, I have to find which book and I can send it to you because I have a lot of
yeah,
notebooks, but
I would love that.
our ancestors live in our nervous system. And
Mm,
so when we heal our nervous system, we actually heal because we're energy bodies, right? We're made up of the same things as the stars, right? And the only difference between us and our ancestors or spirit is that we have a body because we are spirit. Right.
yeah.
And so we have these cords. It's like this web of creation that connects all of us as one. And so when we heal, we really heal this line of our blood memory of our ancestors. I can feel them. I actually, one of the sections of my piece in El Rituale is the circle of ancestors and the candles. So the use of the
Mm,
candles they represent. And so when I was going through this process, I met a shamanic woman, and she taught me how, because I'm an empath as well. So she taught me how to protect my energy with the candles of the ancestors. So when you begin this healing process, they're guiding you because they know also that when you heal, they heal.
mm.
And then you heal future generations. And then but also this blood memory is so important, but we mustn't forget that we also have a soul imprint and a soul memory
Oh, wow. I
from.
didn't think of that. Yeah.
Yeah, and it's funny because I'm like, well, not everybody believes in reincarnation. And it was funny, and as I researched more, Christianity did have reincarnation.
Mm,
Every major
wow.
religion had reincarnation. Over the
Okay.
years, things were omitted. And so
Yeah.
that's why it's really important to understand that, to question what you read and decide what is true for you. But
Yeah.
definitely right now, where I am in my artistic work, is I feel, because I can only share my process. I felt that even though I was having downloads and I was very much aware of past lives, into parallel realities in the quantum field, I knew that the priority in my healing journey first for me was through the ancestral path, because there were especially in Italian culture, because the curses, the superstition, I mean, it's all real. Because
Yeah.
if you hold that belief that the Malocchio, that
Hmm.
you can get, you will, if you,
Yeah.
and that belief is within a pattern of thought, it's in your DNA. And so you have to do a lot of work to change those patterns for you really not to be affected by these things,
By the
because
Malocchio. Yeah.
energy transfer is real. And basically, like, as an energy healer, when I remove Malocchios, I'm removing energy, dense energy. We give ourselves Malocchio, and not all Malocchio is intentional. Some we do when we look in the mirror and we judge ourselves, we're giving it to ourselves.
That's true. I've never thought about it that way. That is,
Yep.
yeah, I guess it doesn't always come from outside forces.
Yeah, and every mother that worries about their kid is giving them Malocchio, because the worry is a negative. It's like, it's a lower vibration, right?
Sure.
So if you think about, like, I don't know if you're into Abraham Hicks, it's like that emotional ladder, right?
Oh, okay.
So
Yeah.
if you're using different emotions, like from the lower rungs of the ladder, you're pulling the person back down into that
Okay.
lower vibrational state rather than trusting that, you created a divine being, and this divine being is capable of miracles. And so it's really shifting the belief system as well in the mind. The
Yeah.
importance of the mind in shifting will also impact the health of the body.
That's
Yeah.
really cool. Yeah,
And
I've never
energy.
thought of that. Yeah, and energy too.
Yeah.
For
Yeah.
sure. So I want to go back to I wrote it down somewhere and I'm not sure I can find it. You were talking about was it the guarded oh, here it is, Guaritrici?
The
The
Guaritrici, the
Okay,
healers.
yeah, the healers.
Yeah.
Okay,
Yeah.
yes.
It's Italian for healer. Yeah.
Okay. All right.
Yeah.
And
They were
so
healers. Mhm.
so is that something that you've researched and kind of like
Yeah.
what drives you a little bit?
Yeah, I mean, basically, like I embody that. The healers, the Guaritrice, they were like, these were olden times. They didn't have lots of roads and hospitals. They didn't have a Pilates studio on every corner or a yoga studio. They didn't have that. They had intrinsic knowledge and connection to nature and the divine. That
Okay.
was their source of information. And so, they used the land to heal. Like, it depended on what type of healer this person was, right?
Okay.
If they knew about herbs, kitchen witch or kitchen magic, or you can heal with your words. Like vibrational, like words, sounds is probably like one of the most powerful forms of healing. Words are spells. What is it? In the beginning of time, what is
Mm,
it? What did God say? Let there be light.
yeah.
Well, what creates light? Sound.
Oh, that's true. Yeah, that's
Right, so
beautiful.
your sound and the words that you speak and the energy behind the words matter. And so when I channel, I channel incantations, and I shared them today at the workshop.
Oh,
So yeah.
nice.
Mhm.
That's awesome. And
Yeah.
so does that go along with because I also wrote down the Southern Italian lineage healing circles, but I think you talked about that with the candles. Is that
Well,
what that
yeah.
is?
Well, for me, well, the healing circles, like if, in modern times, would be like a Reiki circle or a women's circle or a group gathering. Like I have another workshop I'm doing on All Souls Day on November 2nd. It's also the
Oh,
Day of the
cool.
Dead. It's not only South America that celebrates Day of the Dead, Italians do too.
Yeah.
And so I'm doing my witchy bundles. And so I'm going to teach women how to use herbs and how to use fumigation techniques for protection and clearing of the space. And then also using flowers to, elevate, like roses have the highest frequency to elevate the space as well.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. So, and I try to research a L'acqua di San Giovanni workshops too, sacred water, moon water, all of these traditions to get women, or it doesn't have to only be women, it could be community together to do something fun and to talk about things that are positive and connect us to each other and the source of all. And it doesn't have to be specifically a religious thing. It can just be like a group of people that are connected spiritually and they just want to be around like-minded people and just learn about nature. I live in Queens. I get a little bit of nature. So this is fun for me, you
Yeah.
know.
I was born and raised in Colorado, so I have like mountains right there.
So beautiful. It's
Yeah.
funny because I just went to Appalachia in West Virginia for
Okay.
their Italian American festival, and I learned something new because I was dancing with Anna Harsh, and
Yeah, I
she,
just interviewed
yeah.
her.
Oh, that's right, that's right.
Yeah.
And she showed me all of her work with Allegro and the Tarantella dances, but she also showed me some of her work talking about Italian American immigrants in Appalachia and how they would go from mountain towns in Italy and go to mountain towns in the United States when they immigrated. So that was really cool.
Yeah.
Really interesting.
Yeah. Kind of like, so my family's from the Basilicata region, and that's
Ah,
mountainous as well. And so it's kind of interesting to think that they came to Colorado
oh,
with the
that is so
mountains.
interesting because I went
Hmm.
to Krakow in Basilicata
Okay.
last year, and I went to the abandoned village.
Oh, wow. How amazing. Oh
Yeah,
my
it's cool.
gosh. I bet that was so cool.
Yeah, that
So,
was one of the things I wanted to do. So,
I bet. So how long has it been abandoned?
oh, that I don't know. I don't know all the details. So I just wanted to go.
Yeah. Just walk around and see what you could see and feel.
Yep.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. I bet it was a lot.
It actually was. There was a lot of galactic energy there. So,
Oh, wow. That's
it
amazing.
brings you into that Stargate portal, but that's a whole other podcast.
Right. Well, I want to go back to what we were just talking about because I think it's a nice segue into
Mhm.
I saw something on I think your Instagram how you really want to kind of change that narrative of the term witch. And so you were just talking about like witchy bundles and stuff like that and
Yeah.
changing I guess you could say like you could almost compare it to how people look at Italian Americans with the mainstream and the Hollywood, the mafia and the pasta and the meatballs. I'm sure witch has that same and strega means witch in Italian, has some of those same connotations.
Yeah. Well, which is a word that was given to fear women,
True.
really, basically. I mean, I don't want to get all political, but it is what it is. So,
Yeah.
women are originally there were mostly women were the shamans.
Oh wow. See, and people
Yeah,
don't know that.
they don't. Yeah,
Mm-mm.
that divine feminine energy, that creatrix energy. So,
Yeah.
yeah. So I'm trying to change the narrative because it also connects me with like I have my business that I'm building called American Strega,
Hmm.
and I'm using the Italian word Strega, even though it means witch. It's in Italian to represent that I'm American, but I'm also Italian American,
Yeah.
and that I have these gifts that I've always had lifelong gifts, but something happened to me one day where I was called to go back there. There was something left to heal. Um, and as a physical empath, as well as an emotional empath, I'm an extreme empath. I could feel the past traumas of my ancestors. So I would feel things around my neck. I would
Oh
feel
wow.
stabs. I would feel like in the beginning I would feel burning, and I would look and I would be triggered by like fire, and I
Hmm.
didn't understand why. Like I would go into like a PTSD episode I'm like, what is happening? And I
Yeah.
realized that my soul remembered, and
Hmm.
also my blood memory remembered that I was so sensitive and so open, and I'm like, this is not right. Like someone needs to tell these stories about these women who were wise, they were the healers, and then they were murdered for it because of power,
Yeah.
you know. And Ernesto Di Martino talks about that in The Land of Remorse, because as I was like trying to explore dances at Tarantella, I was learning about pizzica and Tarantism and
Hmm.
where the Tarantella comes from. And it was when you were bit by the spider, and so the community would have to dance the venom out. But as I was researching, I'm learning like this was also an outlet for women who felt repressed. So they would say that I was bit by the spider, and I mean, there's more to the story, but my focus is more in my work is more about liberating the soul of these women,
Yeah.
really liberating the soul of the women. What is it, how, rather than always talk about the trauma that they endured, but also to venerate
Yeah.
them and show them in a way um, that these are witches of light, or witch is not maybe such a bad thing. And
Yeah.
when you take away the essence that makes someone who they are going to go crazy, they are going to
Hmm.
fight, and
Yeah.
of course, like in certain times, depending on the time period, if you were a rebellious spirit, you were killed. It didn't matter if you're, even men too, like if you were just a
Sure.
rebellious, it depends on
Yeah.
what time
No.
period we're talking about here. But I mean, I'm
Yeah.
talking about, this is repression for so long, generation after generation after generation of female repression. And this practice of Tarantism was practiced up into the 70s. I mean, it's still being presented in Taranta festivals and Tarantella festivals around Italy, to demonstrate the roots of pizzica, and where the Tarantella comes from. But it's
Yeah.
really but I also think it's a really beautiful way to alchemize that experience as well, to turn it into art, to turn it into a dance, and in that in of itself is very healing.
Yeah. well, even just physical can be so healing. I did an episode, her name was Asunta Capra. This lady, she lives in Denver. She reached out to me and was like, you have to tell this story. And part of the story, her father-in-law was killed, and all of the women, there was some sisters and her, and I think maybe a grandmother, I don't know. They all went outside of the house, and this was reported from a newspaper who did not understand Italian culture. And they danced and they sang and they cried and they wailed, and they were like, we think they've lost their minds. Because they're like, what is happening? It was this tiny little town in Leadville, Colorado, and it's small now, but back in the 1800s, it was so tiny. And just reading that, my mom and I, during the episode, we were talking about how that was beautiful. Like when we read it, we were touched. We were like, that was their way of grieving and letting out their frustration, and because he was killed, and we thought it was beautiful. But it was very interesting also to see how it was portrayed in the newspaper.
Yeah, that's another thing, the media, and it's like the media changes narratives all the time. And, they do.
Yeah. Oh, for sure. Yeah. And I mean, it makes it look like, they were just out in the street losing their minds and going crazy.
Yeah.
And it's like, no, actually it's a process that they're going through.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. All right. Well, briefly, could you tell me a little bit about these women's societies? Because you have me fascinated. I really want to start looking into these stories now.
There's not too much written. I mean, there's information that, that's written as legend says, right?
Sure.
And, but they existed very much so. Just like any underground movement, right? But I do notice when I go to South Italy, you will not see a lot of healers that are advertising that they do energy work or healing work, because there's very much still stigma there. And so I'm using my privilege as an American to say, these are their stories. You don't I'm going to say it. I'm not afraid. I'm also an artist, so I don't really follow rules anyway.
Right.
But it's some of it is partially because it's a sacred practice, and I understand that, and I do respect that. But it's gotten to a point where the media is only representing the Italian culture in a specific way.
Yeah.
In a very specific way. It's like, I love Frank Sinatra, but there's more than just Frank Sinatra music. There's culture before that time, and there's culture before, what we see every day. And I'm doing the best that I can to do it with integrity. And I do advertise, yes, because I think that's also a trauma response that, well, we don't heal because we don't charge for that. And I wonder how much of that comes from it having to be secret healings, right?
Yeah.
And an exchange and a barter, or some oaths and vows that maybe way back then were taken. And so the guilt for taking a currency exchange for healing work is very much prevalent as well. But you don't see it in your face like you would here, like you can go to a club and it's like they have like dark feminine like girls, and I'm just like that's not really my thing, but I just but I can see why like the different perspectives exist, but I also see that it's rooted a lot in fear. Because they don't want to be labeled a witch. They still, into this day, are afraid to be labeled as a witch or to be seen in a negative way, because there's so much influence of like what the neighbors are thinking, and there's so much superstition. But these stories are important. These women were important, and these women helped so many people when everything else failed. But they were done in secret, or they were perceived to be done in secret, because these women were using moon cycles. So it wasn't really secret, or were people just afraid of the dark?
Yeah. No, that's
you know what I
point.
mean? Or people didn't understand. So there's so many avenues and ways and that you can think about it. And it's like, moon cycles are super, super important. And yes, there were dances under the moon. Yes. And then the best is, the witches danced with demons around the walnut tree. It's like, were they dancing with demons? Were they, or were you seeing your inner demons of judgment reflecting women who are being one with nature?
Yeah.
Because
well, just like this story I just told you, he was like, they're losing their mind. And
exactly.
It's like, that's how you're seeing it.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And the wisdom of the shaman is all is perfect. And much of what we see is perspective. So like when we see something, our eyes can play tricks on us based on our mental state, our emotional state, what we choose that we want to see, what we want to believe based on our belief system. So it's like, it kind of goes into that quantum. I'm not a quantum physicist, but it's like the result is shifted by the perspective of the observer.
Yeah. No, that makes sense. It's funny. I have that written down, the quantum.
Yeah.
But no, that makes complete sense. It really does.
Yeah. I don't know too much about quantum physics, but from what I understand when I speak to other spiritual workers, I'm like, I'm not quite channeling because I'm not letting a spirit take over my body. So it's called quantum morphonetic data streaming. So when I receive, I'm receiving from the quantum field. And so basically, like when I access the Akashic records, I'm accessing essentially a spiritual realm or the quantum field where time and space, it's not linear.
Okay. Mm-hmm. Yeah, that stuff is so fascinating and so hard to wrap my head around. It's so crazy.
I'm still learning and like I'm still learning because this was not part of my formal education or my belief system. And I'm learning as I go. So I'm not an expert, but I can only share where I am based on my level of consciousness at this current time, space, reality. And if, it'll change and my awareness will change. And, as we all grow and we evolve and what we know, just like every, when they say eggs are bad for you and then the next year the eggs are not bad for you. And then it's like,
I know.
It's just always going to change. So
it is. Well, I have to say you have my head is going crazy right now because now I have all these thoughts of I want to start researching to see if I can find anything about some of our ancestors who came over here. What did they try to continue it? Just to see what I could find, because how fascinating would that be to know if they were doing it in secret or just doing it in their communities. And yeah, so now I have all these buzzwords where I'm like, don't forget that word. You could search that word up and see if you could find it. I mean, even my first episode that I did, they kind of referenced her as witchy a little bit because she would have all these different sticks and feathers and stuff that she would leave at places. And so it's now I just want to see if I can find anything if they brought some of that over.
I do know, I live in Queens, so there's a lot of Italian Americans here. And everybody's got a nona who does the malocchio removal with the oil and the water. But there's other techniques that you could do with energy work that some people use wheat. I can send you some references of, some books to read. I also dance with Alessandra Belloni, and she's written books about the Black Madonna, and she is a wealth of information.
That's so cool.
So she's definitely another wonderful resource that you can look into. She does drumming and ritual dance, and it's just wonderful. Also Anna Harsh does some great folk dance, tarantellas as well. So I had to really go and seek out this research because there's not a lot here. I even went to the Performing Arts Library at Lincoln Center, and I was looking for they had a lot on tarantella, but really not so much on pre-pagan indigenous, nothing about with the Irapina tribes and the cult of Irapina, or really going back into what those grounded pre-pagan, pre-Christian ritualistic stuff are. I'm really interested in that work. So we'll see.
Yep. And I love that. That's what I love about is discovering that part of our culture that's hidden. That's kind of what my podcast is all about. A couple of weeks ago, I did Guido and Margaret Rossi, who are cattle ranchers out here in Colorado years ago, and that stuff that you don't see that portrayed. Our culture is not portrayed that way by any means. There's the fishermen in Alaska that I've done stories on. And so just rediscovering those parts, like the Black Madonna and stuff that are lost. And because it's not the cool thing, I guess, according
I
to the
just,
media.
according to the media, and
Yeah,
it's frustrating because it's so beautiful.
it is.
It's so beautiful. It's so rich. It's so deep and so diverse. You
Hmm.
know, the southern, like, Italian culture is very diverse. And when I performed my solo, there were oh, that sounded Middle Eastern. I go, well, yeah, there's some Middle Eastern influences. Yes, there's
Yeah,
African drums. There's, Greek, and there's so many different cultures that, it's a diverse. It's a rich country. It's beautiful, and it's been really, at least in the United States, just been
sure.
so limited to what is that representation.
Yeah,
And it's okay, because at least, I mean, there was some representation, not- but there's more,
yeah,
right? And I'm not saying we can't be entertained every once in a while. That's
yeah,
fine. But tell the truth.
yeah. No, absolutely.
Yeah.
And how you were saying that the culture varies, it even varies in America. I mean, my Colorado Italian American experience probably has very similar threads to yours, but different in a lot of ways.
Mhm.
I've listened to other podcasts where I'm like, I've never heard of that. And then I'll talk to other Italians who've grown up in Colorado. It's just not something that it changed. Our ancestors changed and adapted to Colorado. And so it's fascinating. There's just so much out there to be uncovered.
And it's also become a different subculture as well, because there's so many different cultural differences in different regions of Italy. So
Yeah.
when this immigration is happening, it depends on what time period did this particular immigration happen, what regions were these Italian immigrants from, and where did they go as well.
Yeah.
There's so many different factors. So all of it is valid. There's not what I think is frustrating for me is that Hollywood is presenting that, or the media, or like just the general population sees one aspect of a subculture. And I was blown away with Anna's research in
Hmm.
Appalachia. Like, I thought that was
Yeah.
incredible. And a lot of those immigrants were from Calabria, right?
Hmm.
And not every immigrant is from Calabria. There's very different cultural ways in Sicily and Sardinia, and it just depends. So, yeah, just keep digging. It's going to bring
Yeah.
you like on a whole journey, and it's going to be beautiful. It's
Yeah.
going to be fun. And I guarantee you're going to end up somewhere next year, like, just like
Well,
really
thank
diving.
you.
Yeah,
I
diving
appreciate
deep.
that. It, like how you were saying, it gives me that tingles to think about all of that.
Yeah,
So I'll keep diving and you keep dancing. We'll figure it out.
for sure.
Perfect. All right. Well, Danielle, this was so wonderful. Thank you so much for coming on.
Thank you for having me.
Yes, we'll have to do it again.
Yes,
All
definitely.
right. Thank you.
Ciao.